Story 1. My father's cabin in the woods burned down. We found something strange in the ruins. So my father used to own a cabin. In fact, he used to own a lot of different properties, which I suppose is just a roundabout way of saying that we grew up with money. Where things get a bit complicated is how he actually made that money. The line that he constantly fed us was that he was an accountant running his own firm in an office in the city. Long hours, lots of business trips. We never saw him much. And whenever we did, he always seemed tired, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, as if he were always trying to force them to stay open. He was sent off to prison right after I'd finished my first year of college. The sentence? 15 years for washing hundreds of millions of dollars for numerous cartels. 2 weeks after he'd been booked, my mother committed suicide. As it turns out, she'd been helping him out through the entire thing and was facing some time herself. I guess she didn't want to deal with all that and took the drastic way out. A few months later, the government had seized pretty much all his property. All of it, except for that cabin in the woods. It took a long time for me to feel normal again. But eventually, I managed it. Went back to school and graduated with a good enough GPA which allowed me to snag some shitty office job a few months later. But it was enough to pay the bills. Fast forward about another year, and I've basically scrubbed that entire sequence of events out of my brain. It took a little bit of therapy, a lot of psychedelics, but I finally did it, to the point where I was comfortable enough to go back to that cabin. The one place where I'd see my father for more than a few weeks at a time during our summer trips. I decided to take along 3 of my friends from uni: Jack, Pedro, Randy. We drove down there at the beginning of May. The road leading to the cabin hadn't been maintained at all, and as a result, it had become borderline undrivable. I decided to save my vehicle the stress and parked in a nearby lot, leaving us about a 1.5-mile trek through the woods, which really wasn't so bad. Our time in the cabin was pretty much spent getting drunk and stoned, and by the 3rd night, we had completely run out of food. We decided to take the 30-minute walk over to the nearest rest stop, where I knew that there was a 24/7 diner. So we go there, eat our meals, and on the way back, we notice a burning smell in the woods, as if there was a bonfire raging about nearby. Of course, that was a bit strange given that it was around 2 a.m., but we didn't think too much of it at the time, and we kept walking. It was only when the smell continued to grow stronger, as we get closer to the cabin, that we understood something was very wrong. Soon it had become suffocating, and we could see the night sky tinged with orange in the near distance. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, and immediately I was sprinting. My worst fear realized as I reached the clearing where the cabin was located. Completely up in flames, plumes of dark smoke blending in with the night. It was a mix of different emotions that hit me all at once, the combination of them creating a sense of dread so deep I hadn't thought it possible. After reeling myself in, I called 911, with the operator telling me that the fire department would be on their way, but wouldn't be able to reach us for at least 30 minutes. The 4 of us walked away from the cabin in silence, getting far enough so that the smoke was no longer scratching at our throats. Around 10 minutes later, we noticed that the orange tinge in the sky had suddenly disappeared. And I mean suddenly. Like gone in a single blink. I thought I might have been hallucinating, but it was clear from their expressions that my friends were seeing something similar. Cautiously, we started making our way back towards the cabin, noticing that the smoke was no longer heavy in the air, having cleared up considerably. Once we reached the clearing, it had disappeared altogether. I looked ahead, my brain working overtime to comprehend the sight before me. The cabin was no longer on fire. Burnt to a crisp, sure. But the raging, overwhelming flames that had been consuming it just minutes prior had somehow completely fizzled out. The 4 of us looked between each other, as if to confirm we were all still seeing the same thing. Using the flashlight on my phone to survey the damage, I found pretty much what I'd expected. Complete destruction. Absolutely zero hope of recovering anything. I started taking some deep breaths, trying to calm myself down when I heard Pedro yelling out from the other side. "Guys, where the fuck did this thing come from?" We all walked over to him. Nestled in the debris was the corpse of something. A monstrosity. It was about the size of a bear, with the sections of its body that weren't burnt showing pale, clammy skin with deep cuts etched throughout it in what looked to be some kind of crude pattern. Its head had been smashed in, leaving nothing but an abnormally wide bottom jaw, which was still bearing long, black teeth. It had an uncountable number of long, thick arms that it was using to hold something that resembled a human infant, one that appeared to be completely unscathed, devoid of any burn marks. The longer I stared at it, the more that I was convinced I could see it breathing. It was a bizarre enough sight to put us into a near trance. What eventually snapped us out of it was the chanting. It was barely noticeable at first, slowly escalating in pitch until it was clear that there were several human voices shouting in unison. Their tones were animalistic, their words strung together with just the bare beginnings of a rhythm. It sounded like they were speaking English, though I could hardly make out anything they were saying. The strangest part, though, was how quickly it was getting closer to us. Definitely not a walking pace. It was more like a sprint. The four of us shared a quick glance between each other, and immediately there was an understanding. We ran like bats out of hell, tripping over branches, our own feet. But eventually we reached my car, all of us scrambling to pile into it. As I was fumbling for my keys, the chanting had become deafening to a point that hardly made sense. It sounded as if there were speakers lined up in a circle around us, all blasting that horrible noise. And the second that I had put the keys into the ignition, things went silent. I found myself holding my breath as I looked up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness until what I was seeing was unmistakable. Several figures standing completely still at the edge of the woods. All human-shaped, but far too large to be people. All the air being held in my lungs flooded out with one big exhale, and I slammed the vehicle into drive and took a sharp turn before speeding the hell out of there, refusing to look in the rear view until we had made it into the highway. I drove until I had reached the rest stop, which was now hosting an absurd number of police cars. I parked, got out, and approached one of the cops, asking if they were here because of the fire. The cop shook his head. "Fire? No, has there been a fire?" I explained the situation with the cabin to him, deciding to leave out the creature and the chanting for the time being. The cop nodded slowly, his expression remaining largely the same throughout. "All right," he said. "We'll look into it, and then give you an update in the morning. For tonight, just get a hotel or something." We exchanged numbers, and I thanked him. As I began to walk away, he called out to me, "Hey, can I ask you something?" I turned back around. "Yeah," I said. "Sure. Do you happen to be my dad's name's son?" For a while I just stared at him. Eventually, I nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I thought I recognized you. I don't understand," I told him. "I've never seen you before." The cop took a deep breath before taking a quick look around. "Come here," he said. "Come close." Tentatively, I did so. "I can't tell you everything. I don't even know everything. But I think you should have the right to know the truth about your father. All of the stuff that's happened here tonight, all of the shit that you've seen, it has something to do with him." He took another look around before continuing. "Cartels, right? Was that the story they told you? It's not so creative. But I guess it doesn't have to be creative to be believable. 'Cause the shit that he was actually mixed up in. You would not believe unless you've seen it for yourself. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Look, I have your number. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. This is something I'm curious about as well. Maybe you can give me some answers. Point me in the right directions. But not here. So get out of here before people start noticing you. And stay safe. I didn't feel like staying in a hotel that night, so I drove back into the city, dropping everybody off before arriving back at my own apartment. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night, my eyes wired open into the morning as I waited for the officer to call. He still hadn't by the time that noon rolled around, and so I tried calling him instead. No answer. Eventually, I did receive a call from the police, telling me that my father's cabin had burned down and that it was due to a forest fire. I told them that wasn't possible because there had been no forest fire and that I suspected foul play and wanted it to be investigated. It's already been investigated, are the exact words that the officer told me. Don't worry about it. Just get in touch with insurance. Go over your options, and before I could say anything else, he had hung up on me. It was a mixture of anger and curiosity that compelled me to drive back down there. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't for the road leading towards the rest stop to be blocked altogether. There were 2 cop cars guarding the barrier, with a single officer signaling any vehicles approaching to turn around. I pulled over to the side of the road, and after some careful deliberation, I decided to get out and approach him and ask what was going on, just to see what he might say. When I finished the question, he stared at me for a long time. Uncomfortably long. Emergency construction is what he eventually told me. After that encounter, I pretty much dropped trying to figure things out. Some weird things have started happening to me since. Every night, I swear I can hear a baby crying in the apartment across from mine. The apartment that I thought had been occupied by a pair of college kids who definitely do not have children. That cop that was supposed to call me finally did, a few nights ago. When I answered, I was met with dead silence on the other end. Nearly 30 seconds of it until the line clicked dead. There's an abandoned house sitting across the street from my apartment building, one that's supposedly been there for years because the development of this store meant to take its place keeps getting delayed. Somebody has started staring at me through its second-floor window. Whenever I catch them doing it, they're quick to close the blinds, so I can never catch any details. But I know that the moment I turn away from it, their eyes are back on me. I can't confirm that any of these things are related, whether it has anything to do with my father. I just know that I don't want to deal with it and that I want it to end. Story 2. My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours. So I got home at around p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of joints and spark one up as I pull YouTube on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close passing out when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I'd been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I remembering waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once it did, I grabbed my phone, checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m. from what I remember. I was starving, and so I got up, began walking towards the fridge. And then I noticed it. A soft, but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch. My roommate coming home. The shower turning on. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off. I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell? Realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room, but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. Hey man, you all right? No response. I considered kicking the door down, but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. Sent 2 hours ago. I look at the bathroom door, then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there, go back into the living room, and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone. My roommate's phone. The panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, and so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately, I get this feeling that I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. Soon, I'm looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know, its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away. But there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion, that this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed, that the only element of its composition was that of unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it. But the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as batshit. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over, for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. Soon I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officers still hadn't come down. Soon I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos, officers shouting over each other and into their radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms where I found 2 nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside of the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall. And one of the most unsettling ones, have you ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in, shit that I had written off as figments of my imagination, simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time where I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered. But as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late-night drowsiness at the time, and I had never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. A cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. What happened? I asked him. What did you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. I don't know, he said. I mean, I really don't know. I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A fucking fire. I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now, and I can hear the shower. Story 3. My husband has a towel on his face. Hurry up in the shower. We have to leave soon. I yelled towards the bathroom at my husband. Every year, at some point in the days leading up to Christmas, our families get together. We were already making bad timing when he realized he needed a shower. I had misplaced my earrings, paranoid about making us even later. As I walked past the bathroom, I noticed the door wide open. My husband stood there, still naked from having recently departed the shower. He had draped a pastel orange towel over his head, one that I didn't even know we owned. It didn't cross my mind at the time, just a fleeting thought. He swayed gently from side to side, like a swinging pendulum. I giggled. Stop being silly. You know we're running late. Have you seen my earrings? Immediately upon entering the bedroom, I spotted them gently glistening on the bedside table. Relieved, I yelled again. Never mind, found them. As I put the first in, my gaze fell directly ahead of me, at the painting of a lighthouse hung on our bedroom wall. My husband was never a stranger to local markets. He almost had a talent for buying the strangest items. I've grown used to it, but this painting always stood out to me as a bizarre purchase. The lighthouse stands as the subject, with a series of indistinct, colorful blobs painted around the bottom, a crowd of nondescript people, I had always assumed. On the frame at the bottom, a title or note or quote of some kind had been etched in. The Jolly Good Fellows. My trail of thought was cut short as I failed to get the second earring in. I had stabbed myself slightly and began to head to the bathroom for the assistance of the mirror. He was still standing there, swaying. Honey, we really need to go soon. Please get ready. I approached the mirror. Seeing no blood, I breathed a sigh of relief and put the second earring in. The whole time, from the corner of my eye, I could still see him swaying. The towel blocked any view of his head. My patience was wearing thin. Had he even sorted his clothes out yet? Honey, come on, I spoke as I lifted the towel from his face. Peering under, I expected to see him smiling, acting playfully. I felt a little bad, but being ever aware of the ticking clock, sometimes I have to remind him to have urgency, even when he's just playing around. His eyes were wide, his face emotionless. He stared forward as though there wasn't a wall a few feet from his face, like he was looking just a little past everything. He stopped swaying as the towel was removed, but remained in this state. I gently held his hand. Come with me. Let's sit down. I knew something was wrong. As I guided him to the bed and sat him down, his arm felt limp, as though his muscles were void of any connection to the brain. Let's get you some clothes, okay? We can talk about what's wrong. I tried to speak calmly as I turned around and searched through the wardrobe. I began asking questions, trying to take his mind off of things. My mind, while still aware of the time, was now more focused on my husband's well-being. Noticing a lack of answers or responses, I turned back to face him. Have you ever jumped at the lack of something? Usually, we jump at the sudden presence of something we were not expecting. Perhaps the sudden movement of an object we thought would remain motionless. But when I saw my husband wasn't behind me, my body jolted slightly. I hadn't heard him move, or felt him walk past me. I expected him to still be on the bed. The lack thereof was enough of a shift to shock me. "Honey," I yelled slightly, wondering where he was. I walked past the bathroom. There he was, orange towel draped over his head, swaying gently at the same rhythm as before. "If you don't respond to me, I'm calling an ambulance." I needed a quick answer. My mind jumped straight to some form of brain injury, perhaps from falling over in the shower. I knew that acting fast is the only chance you have to minimize damage. He didn't answer. I removed the towel from his head as I dialed emergency services. Again, he stopped swaying. As I explained everything to them, I watched as he knelt down, picked the towel back up, and draped it back over his head. The swaying continued thereafter. Paramedics arrived shortly. He put up no fight and allowed them to escort him to the ambulance in a wheelchair. I kept asking questions about whether he'd be okay. They had to keep assuring me that whilst the hospital would do everything they could, they had no information to go off of. My racing mind looked past this and continued to ask similar questions regardless. He kept trying to stand up whilst en route to the hospital, yet would be compliant when gently pushed back down. As long as someone was guiding him, he would follow. When this stopped, would he try to move? The same had happened back home. He only got up and left once I had sat him down and let go of him. Through the sound of the sirens wailing overhead, the bumps of the ambulance's journey, and trying to hold back my tears, I could hear a familiar tune. My husband, showing almost no other signs of activity, was gently humming. I leaned in to get a better listen. It was a very low tone, and each note seemed to begin as a hum, yet end as more of a raspy breath. Each one seemed to continue for slightly longer than they were supposed to. But I recognized this tune he was humming, for he's a jolly good fellow. Arriving at the hospital felt like a blur. Everyone knew exactly where they were going. I was following along, completely lost in this maze of signs and painted lines intended to guide. We had left the ambulance and arrived at his assigned bed before I could process what was happening. As soon as he was laid down, the confusing blur continued. "Ma'am, could we borrow you in the next room? We just need you to fill out some paperwork. Not until I know if my husband is okay," I snapped. "We understand. But the best chance at survival is if we understand everything. This paperwork will take care of some of that." I was assured that a doctor would be in the room shortly, and that my husband was in good hands. I shouldn't have listened. They certainly didn't. I explained that he kept trying to get up and walk about, but they clearly underestimated. I hadn't even helped the lady fill out my husband's personal information before we were informed that he was missing. "He can't be far. Keep an eye on all entrances." The staff spoke to each other urgently. I was asked to remain calm and continue helping with the paperwork, but I refused. I attempted to run around the hospital to join the search, but was quickly told that I don't have the authority to be wandering around alone. I hardly cared. My husband was the only thing on my mind, but I didn't want to be escorted out and risk not seeing him at all when he's found. I took my efforts outside the hospital. I looked around the parking area and then the nearby streets. After an hour and a half, I was still wandering, with no word from the hospital of any findings in the building. I began to walk home, hoping that somehow he had remembered the way. It was a 20-minute walk. I could not imagine that he had survived in his state, let alone managed to correctly identify the entire journey home. But it was worth a shot. I arrived to find our front window smashed. No glass on the pavement below told me that somebody had broken in. Perhaps I should have been more cautious, but I just wanted to know if my husband was inside. My hand shook as I struggled to get the key into the lock. Once I did, I turned the handle and ran inside. I don't think I even closed the door behind me. Honey, are you here? I don't know if I was surprised to see what I saw, or whether I expected this. There he was, in the bathroom, orange towel draped over his head, swaying gently. This time, a pool of blood collected on the tiled floor below, dripping from his right arm. Cuts on his legs and torso told the full story. He had no concept of pain. He smashed the window to get in, to get back to this exact spot. The injuries meant nothing to him for whatever reason. His mind was focused only on anchoring itself in that bathroom, under the gentle weight of a towel. Crying, I approached him and lifted the towel slightly. I hardly even noticed the blood soaked into it. His eyes were red. Had he even blinked since this began? The humming continued. I should have contacted emergency services immediately, but instead, I just stood there. I stared into his eyes, pretending he was staring back into mine. I wanted him back. Gently, he lifted an arm and pulled the towel back down over his face. I don't know how long I stood there sobbing. Please, talk to me. I love you. The gentle humming would have been comforting, but the slight inconstancy of the rhythm was a subtle reminder that my husband had no awareness. I thought back to all our recent conversations, everything we've ever done together. Lately, he's had a fascination with the ocean. I could never understand it. A horizon swallowed by the forever swaying and crashing of waves never appealed to me. He used to tell me all sorts of facts. One that particularly disturbed me was an old tradition of placing a towel over the faces of sailors who had passed whilst at sea. Once back on the shore, you'd place a towel over their face as you waited for somebody to arrive with help or a hearse. Curiosity having a moment of breakthrough as I grieved my still living husband, I went into the bedroom. I took a closer look at the painting. The blobs at the bottom of the lighthouse, I had always assumed them to be nondescript people with little detail added, though I had never understood why the blobs were so colorful. Only then did I realize they were not a crowd gathering at the bottom of the lighthouse. They were dozens of bodies laid out on the shore. Pastel-colored towels were draped over their faces. Perhaps my husband is there now, forever visiting the lighthouse, staring into the horizon as it's swallowed by the ocean. Story 4. I had one job. Don't open the door. Roger was a no-frills type of guy. He was of good posture, stern, and his clothes were crisp down to the French cuffs on his sleeves. His tone was soft and his words direct but polite. I'd known him all but a few seconds before I decided that I could trust this man with my life, which was why I took everything he said quite seriously. I had found the gig online. It was a posting for someone to house sit. I surmised that Roger was likely some kind of property manager and was short-staffed, which was why he had to use a third-party app to fulfill his needs, even if he weren't used to seeking help. Because although he seemed relaxed, a part of me felt as if he was reluctant to let go of the reins easily, which made me think that he was either incredibly passionate about his job or really responsible, both of which I found to be extremely positive qualities. That concludes the house tour. Now he clapped his hands together. The fridge, the kitchen, the pantry, the living room, bathrooms, even any of the bedrooms is yours to use. Consume. Sleep. Relax. It's up to you. But there's one rule that I insist be followed. Yeah, sure, I nodded. Until I get back, do not open the door. What? I regretted the words the instant they left my lips. No, yeah. Okay? Yeah, he didn't say another word. Only stared at me. No, I get it. I promise I won't open the door until you get back. I like you, kid. and the algorithm thinks you're fit for the job, which I tend to trust these things. So let's be clear here. Do not open the door. It doesn't matter what happens. Don't let anyone inside. Yeah, of course. No, I get it. Some people like to limit their personal spaces. I once went to a friend's house. It was a model home at first, the kind that all the prospective buyers tour right. And my friend's parents never got over the walls. They always complained that all the people that walked in and out of them, touched them, seeped their dead skin cells into the walls or something. They even painted over it quite a few times, if I remember correctly. But still, they said it wasn't the same, that it wasn't right. So yeah, I completely understand. Personal space and everything. I respect that. Roger let out a content-filled sigh, and then smiled easily. You're going to do great. He looked at his watch. I had never seen a nicer one, to be honest. Okay, I've got another engagement. So lock the door behind me. And I'll be back. Then without another word he left. Don't open the doors, I repeated after him. Got it. The house was a good size. I've house sat at others before, mainly to feed their dog or some exotic fish. And although there wasn't much furniture in this one, it felt classy. Timeless, almost. I walked around to check that all the windows were secured. The sliding door leading to the backyard was closed. The door from the kitchen, which led into the garage, was locked. Before I sat down in the front room and turned on the TV, I was in the middle of watching a rerun of Campfire Tales when I heard my first knock. I turned off the TV and waited, hoping whoever it was would go away. Hello, they knocked again. Do you have a moment for Jesus Christ? Shit, I muttered, getting off the couch. I walked over to the door and leaned in. Yes, I cleared my throat. Hello, hi, we're with the local church. And we were wondering if you have accepted Jesus into your life. No, I'm sorry. I'm not religious. I lied. If you'd like, we can give you some pamphlets for some light reading. He pulled on the handle. They helped me a lot some time back. And maybe you'd find use for them too. A second voice came next. A lot of people have told us that they have been useful for them, not knowing when they needed it the most. If you could, sorry, I'm not interested. But thank you. There was a pause, sure. We get it. But do you mind if we leave you these pamphlets on the door for another member of the household, perhaps? You can grab them whenever you'd like. Yeah, no, yeah. That's fine. Thanks. I could hear the paper scraping against the door and saw the handle jiggle slightly before the first voice spoke again. Thanks for your time today. I waited for the sound of their footsteps to disappear before I decided to breathe. I then looked through the peephole to make sure they were gone. My hand instinctively reached for the handle to grab the pamphlets, as I didn't want the house to look untidy from the outside. I had no sooner touched the knob before I remembered what Roger said. But no one's here, I said aloud. Still, I'd technically be breaking the rule. I couldn't help but smile. When did you get to be such a stickler for rules? I said to myself, feeling rather proud as I returned to the couch and clicked through a few movie titles on stream before settling on an old classic. I don't know how far I got into the movie before I heard another knock on the door. What are the chances, I thought. What a busy house. I turned off the TV and waited, hoping they would go away. Hello, a voice came from outside. Pizza delivery, my stomach growled. I looked up at the clock. It was past noon. The only problem was I didn't order any pizza. Hello. Pizza delivery. They knocked again. I've got a double pepperoni and a pineapple pizza. For Roger? I got up from the couch again. Roger didn't tell me that this gig included lunch. Hold on just a minute, I shouted. I'm coming. I looked through the peephole as I reached for the door handle. But something wasn't right. I could feel it. Was this a test? Had Roger called the local pizzeria to make sure that I wasn't breaking his one simple rule? If I did, would that mean I wouldn't get paid? I looked through the peephole again. It was a young guy younger than me, but looked old enough to drive. He wore a dark blue polo that had curled collars at the edge, and was holding up a red insulated bag. I didn't order any pizza. I could see the kid sigh before looking at the receipt. Is this to 26? Yeah. Well, I've got a pizza here for you. For Roger? Yeah. For Roger. Well, I'm not Roger, but this is to 26. It is. Look, the pizza's already been paid for. If you don't want to tip me, that's fine. I just have to get to my next delivery. He waited. I didn't budge. I'm going to leave it here. He directed toward a half pillar on the porch, shaking his head as he grabbed 2 boxes and set them down before zipping up his delivery pouch. Cheap ass, he muttered. I felt my stomach growl again as I watched him walk away. And walk away. Now, I failed to mention this earlier, but the peephole oversaw the entire driveway and most of the sidewalk. So when the guy walked out of sight, he was a good house down before I could no longer see him. The thing was, I never saw his delivery vehicle either. I looked at the pizza, sitting on the half pillar. A few cheap paper plates were stacked on top, and I could see the packets of Parmesan being warmed up. I took a deep breath in hopes to stave off my urges. But that only made it worse, as the smell permeated through the door. It was pizza, all right. I would bet my life on that one. But still, I didn't open the door. Instead, I got back on the couch and turned down the volume on the TV. In fact, I got to about 3 volume before I decided to mute the thing outright, and began to watch my movie in complete silence. Some time passes and I ate some burritos I found in the freezer. I was mid-bite into this double-stuffed cheese burrito when the sound of 2 kids outside the door could be heard. No, you knock. No, come on. You do it. Hey, it's your ball. Fine. This kid knocked on the door. Hello, he shouted loudly. I'm sorry for disturbing you, but our ball went over your fence. Do you think you could get it for us? I didn't move a muscle. Another knock came. Hello, maybe they would go away. Hello, he knocked again. We can hear you, Yano. We can hear you chewing. I swallowed my last bite roughly and wiped my hands on my jeans. I leaned into the peephole to see 2 kids about 7 or 8 standing outside. They had on shorts and t-shirts and looked a little muddy. The other kid's voice rang through as I approached. Come on, please. We just want our ball back. I'm sorry, but I can't help you right now. I'm busy. Could you come back later? Please, the first kid begged. Could you help us? My dad's about to come home soon, and he's going to be so mad if I told him I lost another ball. I looked into the peephole again and saw that the kid looked nervous, scared even. He was wringing his hands. Fuck, I muttered under my breath. Okay, hold on. Let me go take a look, I hollered. Then I walked toward the back and glanced around the yard. Sure enough, a bright red ball with a yellow star on it sat in the grass near the fence. I grabbed the handle before debating with myself. It's technically a door, right? Sliding. Door. Sliding door. I played with the words in my mouth. It's right in the name. It's a sliding door, I chuckled. That's like asking if water's wet, but still the sound of the kid worrying rang in my ear, and I didn't want him to get into trouble. And I had my hand on the door when I also noticed a football laying on its side nearby. I walked halfway between the sliding door and the front door and shouted, "Which ball is yours?" What? I shouted through the door. What kind of ball do you have? There was a pause. A basketball, the second kid said. I went back to the sliding door and scanned the grass before going back. Sorry, kids. I can't help you out. There's no basketball back there. No doofus, the first kid whispered. It's a soccer ball, he yelled. I shook my head. No soccer balls either. Please, could you open the door and let us take a look? Maybe you missed it. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. No, I'm sorry. I can't help you right now. Maybe if you come back later. No, you don't understand, the first kid cried. I need that ball. My dad's going to be so mad at me. Yeah, the second kid chimed in. Please could you just let us take a look? No, I said firmly. I'm sorry, one of the kids kicked the door before I heard them running away. I breathed a sigh of relief and unclenched my fist. I didn't even know I was tense until just now. It's just a door, I said, as I returned to the couch. It's just a silly rule, but I turned off the TV and sat there in silence. Too afraid to make a sound. Too afraid to even finish my burrito. I didn't have to wait long before I got off the couch again. At first, it was 2 shots in the air. Then 3 more in succession. I could hear a car alarm go off somewhere in the neighborhood. But the sound of a gun going off seemed unusual, as this was a rather nice area. Someone screamed in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from across the street. I bolted upright and rushed to the door, peering through the eye-hole, where I saw a woman barging out of her door, her dress clumped in one hand so she could run, and blood dripping down the side of her face. She looked terrified as she crossed the street barefoot, up the driveway, toward the porch, and slammed her fist into the door. Help! Please! Help me! She screamed. I need help. Please! Call 911. She banged on the door again. My husband's trying to kill me. I could see the fear in her eyes as she kept looking back at her house. The door shook again. Help me. Please. Open the door. I don't know when my hand had left my sides, but when I looked down, they were gripping the handle so hard that my knuckles were white. Please, he's coming. But I waited. Someone, she banged on the door. Help, and waited. But no one came out of her house. The 2 of us stood there, the woman's frantic knocking ebbed as the minutes passed. Was it 2 minutes now? 5 perhaps? I'm not sure. But eventually, she stopped banging on the door. I looked into the peephole and saw her chin had dropped to her head. And she was smiling. I tried to look away, but she moved closer. Slowly. But closer toward the door until her eyes were staring directly into the peephole. I see you. I nearly fell over backwards as the door suddenly began to shake. The thing looked like it was going to buck right off from the frame. I crawled backwards on my hands and feet until my back hit the side of the couch. Open the door. I shook my head, too terrified to move, and waited until the knocking stopped. The sun was still out when the woman first came. It was now barely visible through the windows. Dusk had settled on the house, and all of the lights were out, even the TV. I was still on the floor, hugging my knees, when a knock came at the door. It was softer and quiet, dignified even. Hello, it was Roger's voice. Hey, I'm back. I was so glad to hear him that I immediately rushed to the door. He knocked again just before I could reach the handle. Could you open the door? The words froze me in my steps. Roger, hey, yeah, it's me. Let me in. Roger. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it looked like Roger. Hey, come on. Could you let me in? It's cold outside. Don't you have the key? He reached into his pockets and then shook his head. Nope. I must have left them at the office. Then he looked at me and flashed an award-winning smile. Hey, you didn't take what I said that seriously, did you? Before turning around and noticed the pizza boxes tilted on the half pillar. Wow, I guess you did, he smirked. We're definitely going to have to use you again soon. He picked up the boxes and palmed the door handle. Now could you please open the door? I shook my head. No, you explicitly told me not to open the door. Yeah, he told me. And you did a great job. Might have took it too literally, but I appreciate that sort of thing. But come on. Hey, it's me. Open the door. Why don't you have the key? He shrugged. I don't know. It was busy today, and I must have forgotten them. He reached around his pants before pulling out a set from his breast pocket. Oh, look. I thought I had them. But these are the wrong ones. He waited. Now come on. Open the door. I shook my head and backed away. Open the door. The frame shook. Look, I'm not playing around anymore. Open the door before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing. Your gig's over now. Go home. No, I told him. Open the fucking door, man. His yelling was so loud it made the door rattle. And then the entire house started shaking. I squatted on the floor and covered my ears, my teeth shivering in my mouth as I prayed that he would go away. I was so scared that I was even too afraid to cry. But eventually, the shaking stopped, and the house was quiet again. I sat there for nearly an hour before I forced myself to sit back on the couch, where I once again heard the door handle jiggle, and the sound of metal in the lock before it turned and clicked open. Roger walked through the door, looking as calm and pristine as ever. He had on an award-winning smile as he looked at me. Hey, you made it, he beamed, pulling out a stack of money from his pocket. I knew you would. It wasn't long after the first time that I met Roger when I got another request from him to house sit. After what happened last time, I didn't think that I'd ever accept another gig from him. But a friend had figured out that with tips, I had essentially made $100 per hour. And many people were quick to mention that it's not as if I died or anything really. Does no one care about my well-being? Hey, I'm really glad you came. Roger shook my hand as I arrived. We've been a little stretched out and could use the help. It was the same house. Again, you're free to anything. But remember, don't open any doors, I assured him. Roger smiled an award-winning grin. You got it. He looked at his watch. It was still the most interesting timepiece I had ever seen. I've got another engagement, he told me. Could you get the door? He hollered as it closed behind him. I went up and locked it before sitting down on the couch. Experience told me to not turn on the TV. It also reminded me to pay no mind to the door when it was knocked, which happened before my butt could properly warm the seat. Hey, Roger's voice came through the door. I forgot the keys on the counter. Could you let me in? I didn't make a peep. I didn't even turn my head towards the kitchen to confirm or deny. He knocked again. Open the door, would ya? I'm running late for my next engagement. The rapping came a little rougher this time. What's with you? Come on. What part of running late don't you understand? You know how traffic is around this time. You live around here. I looked up at the clock. It was rush hour. Would you open the door? Hey, you did this last time too, and I had to drive all the way back to the office to get the keys. He knocked harder on the door. Open up. But I did not budge. I didn't even look. Eventually, The knocking ceased, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I could feel sweat running down my face. But when I reached to dry them, I realized that they were actually coming from my eyes. I've never been particularly good with conflict. For instance, I went to brunch on Sunday with my dad and ordered the salmon with steamed broccoli. The waiter brought me the chicken fillet and grilled zucchinis. I ate the pan-seared thigh quietly. Thinking about food, my stomach growled as it was almost lunch. I glanced at the door. It was quiet as a mouse. So I got up and went to the kitchen and pulled open the freezer drawer. To my horror, the burritos were missing. They were actually quite decent last time, even the skin, so I was bummed to say the least. I reached for the double handles of the French-doored fridge, but froze before I pulled them. It was right there in the name, wasn't it? French. Doors. I didn't need an etymology degree to know what that meant, although I did think about it for a second as my stomach gurgled. But in the end, fear won out, and I retreated to the living room and sat down on the couch, hungry. Nearly an hour passes before a scratching noise woke me up from my daydreams. I had been planning on how to spend the money, things that I would buy, stuff that I'd eat. It was already practically gone even before I got it. The scraping noise sounded as if it was coming from the door. I looked to my left, expecting a knock to follow, but it didn't happen. Yet I could still hear the noise. Against my better judgment, I got up slowly from the couch, going closer to the landing room until I stood beneath the chandelier. "Hello," I called out. Don't ask me why I did that. It's not as if I actually wanted an answer. Who's there? Another stupid question. I waited for the door to move, the handle to jiggle. Anything really. But it was dead as a doorknob. Still, I heard the noise clear as a sunny day. I put a hand on the front door, but it didn't budge. Instead, it sounded as if the noise was coming from upstairs. The scratching came again, overcoming the stillness of the house. I reluctantly turned my head upward and followed each step with my eyes. Besides the house tour, I had never ventured up there. Not alone, at least. The scratch came again. I should have sat back down, turned my shoulder away even, after I figured that it was none of my business. But then I heard a meow. Now I've house sat before, as I've mentioned, mostly to feed someone's dog or exotic fish. But every once in a while it would be to accompany a cat, even though I've found them to be largely self-sufficient creatures, with the only problems I've ever faced with cats being them trapped in a room, which, without their litter box, it would only mean one thing. Shit, I swallowed as it meowed again. I had read once that cats mimic the cries of human babies in order to appeal to our better instincts. It worked. I climbed the stairs and whistled softly, "Here, kitty, kitty." Here, kitty, kitty. All of the doors upstairs were closed, except for the bathroom, which was slightly ajar. "Come on, cat," I hissed. "Where are you?" Meow. The door to my left vibrated as something pushed it from the other side. Meow. I could see it pacing back and forth from the door gap, pacing restlessly, waiting to be let out. "Maw," it growled as I got closer, almost as if demanding to be let out. But as I approached, a foul stench emanated through the door. It was thick and sickly, reminding me of cooked mushrooms after they had already passed. "Shit," I repeated. "They're not going to be happy if there is cat crap all over the carpet." Meow, it whined. This time softer. But a thought came to my head. A bedroom door was in fact a door, even if it was on the inside. The thing started to growl as I backed away. Louder now. Deeper. As if it could sense my reluctance. As if it knew that I would keep it trapped inside, maybe forever. The footsteps beneath the door grew heavier. I could see the shadow of growing in size as it stretched beyond the door's threshold. I couldn't get down the stairs quickly enough, jumping on the couch, waiting for the growling to dissipate, waiting for the silence. The minutes ticked by and they felt excruciating, like I was holding my breath, struggling to breathe. Each second ticking. In my ear, which seemed maddening, the room circling, spinning, falling down all around me until I nearly went crazy. It wasn't just quiet. It was complete silence. I couldn't hear any cars outside or dogs barking. No birds or wind. I could only hear my own heart beating. If I thought about it too much, I had to remember how not to die. So when a knock finally came at the door and I jumped in my seat, I was almost relieved that I was not alone. You've got to be shitting me. Through the peephole, I saw a life-sized, larger-than-life minotaur standing outside. It was holding the severed head of a goat. That's a hard pass. I almost laughed. You're losing your touch. The minotaur spread open its arms, almost as if it were accepting a hug. Unmoving. This was in broad daylight, which should have made the entire thing hilarious. Except as I continued staring at it, trying to find a smile on my face, I began to realize that it wasn't trying to trick me to open the door for once. Instead, it was standing before me, almost as if it were posing, as if it were mocking me. The hilarity of it all disappeared as I stared closer at the goat head and looked into the black of its eyes, thinking I saw within them the fear of its last moments. But it was only my reflection. I backed away and sat on the couch, wondering if the creature was still standing outside the door. I turned on the TV, because anything was better than this impending silence. Some time passes and the screen is playing, but I'm not paying attention. I could feel something in my gut beginning to disappear, as if a blanket had been lifted from the house. And suddenly, I felt lighter. I would have breathed a sigh of relief, but a shimmer nearby caught my eye. I glanced around for the specks of blue, following it across the backyard, through the cracks in the adjoining fence. Images of the pool bouncing off the sun, and a red bikini walking like a still image filled the gaps. She was mesmerizing. Her hair was a thick brown and her steps were light and graceful. I had been so drawn to her that when my nose touched the glass, I didn't even feel the cold. She jumped in. I got on my tippy toes to watch her. I waited to see her emerge. Except she didn't. Splashes of water came up the middle. They felt like screams, inaudible wails that no one could hear, not even her family. I banged on the window. Hey! Hey! I banged on it with both fists. Somebody help her. Somebody. But there was no one but me. My fingers tried finding the latch on the window, but as they moved past the blinds, my fingertips like blindworms searched for an opening, before finally realizing that this wasn't a window. Not really. None of them were. They were only single panels of glass staring from the outside in. I ran to the sliding door in the backyard, but I hesitated. My fingers were on the handle, and I could see her hand reaching out of the water. She was waving it frantically, begging for help. But this was a door, a sliding door. I let out a deep breath, and then inhaled again. When I looked up, the hand was still there, waving frantically. This time I held my breath and counted. Nearly a minute went by before I exhaled. A total of 5 minutes must have passed, and still the hand was waving and waving. But I would not be waiting. I got back on the couch and ignored everything, all except the hunger. I tried to quell my stomach by flipping through the TV. jumping from platform to platform, wishing that there was some sort of app that could bring all of these streamers together so that I could spend every following second consuming instead of thinking about the drowning woman. I finally settled on something and began to watch it, just to stop the thoughts inside of my head. But I couldn't ignore the sound that came from beneath me, under the couch. I'm hungry. It was so soft, I almost mistook it for something from the TV. I stood up and backed away. You said you'd feed me if I was hungry. I pushed the couch away and found a trapdoor where I had been sitting this entire time. There was a hole in one of the planks. I looked into it and saw an eyeball staring back at me. The figure backed up and revealed the outlines of a kid. They were pale as a ghost, with long black hair that was unkempt and unruly. You're not him. Who? I asked quickly. Is it Roger? I don't know their name. Who are you? I asked. Christian. Christian. Are you okay? No, I told you. I'm hungry. Fuck. I whispered. It's the house. It's just the house again. I shook my head. No way. I'm not going to listen to you. Can you feed me? Christian reached a tiny finger through the hole. And for the first time since I started house sitting here, I had been touched. This was real. It felt real. I scrambled to the floor and fiddled with the lock. Christian, I'm going to get you out of here. I promise. No, don't. What if he finds out? We'll get in trouble, he jumbled. I looked around, half expecting Roger to appear out of nowhere, half wondering if there was a murdering deranged homeowner that was going to sever my head from my beating heart. Don't open any of the doors, Christian warned. What happens if I open a door? You'll never leave. Christian disappeared from view. I hit the lock. Fuck this shit. I'm sick and tired of always being afraid. I ran to the kitchen and rummaged through the drawers. This house had enough of me. I found a hammer and clutched it in one hand, calling the police with the other as I went back to the living determined to bust this lock. Hello, 911. What is your emergency? I'm a house sitter, and I found a kid trapped inside. I think the guy I've been working for, or the people he's working for. Fuck. I don't know. I don't know anything, I realized. All I know is that there's a boy here. A kid. His name's Christian, and they've been keeping him under the fucking couch. Please. You've got to help us. I don't know when someone's coming back. I've tracked your location through the GPS signal. 2 units will be arriving there shortly. Please stand by. I didn't have time to wait, afraid that I would be caught in the act. I tossed my phone on the couch and grabbed the hammer and started wailing on the lock repeatedly. It was like striking an anvil. When the joint finally gave, I uncurled the steel grip from the latch and pulled open the trapdoor. Down below, I could see a tiny figure, shivering. He was only wearing a white cloth around his waist, and he was stick-thin. The basement was completely empty except for a twin mattress on the floor and an orange bucket in the corner. I was afraid to go down there, even now, so I reached my hand out for him. Come on, Christian. I'm here to help you. He looked reluctant at first, but eventually started climbing up the steps. When he was close enough, I grabbed him by the forearm and yanked him out of that hole, trying to cover him with my arms as he was absolutely freezing to the touch. A familiar voice from behind startles me. He sounded disappointed. I told you not to open any of the doors. I whirled around and shielded Christian behind me. Is that the man? I could feel the boy shaking. No, I've never seen that man before. Roger walked toward us, and I flinched when he extended his hand. Here, buddy. Let's get you warmed up. He took Christian's hand and led him to the couch, acting all calm and shit as if I hadn't just discovered a literal kid trapped under the house. A house that he seemed to be in charge of. "You're so fucked," I told him, shaking. "I'm going to fully cooperate with the police when they get here. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if they think I'm an accomplice. I just wanted you to know that Roger didn't pay me much mind." Instead, he smiled at the kid and took off his jacket, covering the boy. "Hold on tight, all right? For just a little longer. I'll get you something to eat soon." Roger turned towards me. I backed away. "Don't you come near me." He put his hands in his pockets and said, "I told you not to open any doors. To hell with that." Roger shook his head. "We had so much hope for you. You showed so much promise. There's more of you in on this? Do you know what this house is?" He didn't wait for me to lie. "It's a conduit of sorts. A Schreidenger's house, if you will. Nothing truly exists in this reality until one of the doors are opened. Not really. There are many places like this on Earth, and we've watched over them for a really long time. We do this in order to preserve our timeline. Here, walk with me." He brushed past me and left through the front door. I looked at Christian, but the kid was fast asleep. "Come on," Roger told me. "The kid will still be here." "Unfortunately." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "A conduit?" "He leads me down the driveway." "That's right. Nothing happens unless a door is opened. And the consequences could be big or small. The pizza guy the other day? If you had opened it, he likely would have gotten a tip. But what he did with that money later is beyond your or even our control. Just like the kid who lost the ball. They could have came in and took a look for themselves. But they would have quickly realized that it was missing for themselves. And who knows what their father would have done. We crossed the street. Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because once you know how it works, you can't really watch the house anymore." "Not really. It's why I've had to use people like you. There were others." Roger didn't even smile. "Okay, fine. Say I believe you. Then why do they start getting angry?" "Well, some of them. Not the kids, I guess. Wouldn't you start getting angry if you suddenly realized that you weren't going to exist? Unless, of course, you were in a similar situation to Christian's." We had arrived at the house across the street. Roger knocked on the door. A woman answered it, and I immediately recognized her, even though she wasn't smiling this time, nor was there blood dripping down the side of her face. "Hello. How can I help you too?" "Hi, we were wondering if you'd be interested in a termite inspection." Her face went from cheery to stoic in an instant. "Oh no, I'm sorry. The homeowner isn't here right now. Maybe you could leave a card or something, and I could give it to them." Roger cracked an award-winning smile. "No, I don't think that'll be necessary as we're only here for a short while. Thank you for your time," and then turned on his heels and walked away. The woman looked at me one last time before slamming the door shut. I caught up to Roger, but she was fine. "Exactly. But if you had opened the door the other day, her kids would have been killed by her husband. Likely her too, even if you had helped. And you too, if you had opened that door. He's a large guy after all." We climbed the driveway and Roger stopped short at the door. I could hear the sirens going off in the distance. Christian was sitting upright on the couch, rubbing his eyes. I tried my best not to shake as I entered alone. He looked up at me, and I could do nothing but weep and say, "I am so sorry."